Dr. Trita Parsi drops by to discuss the Iran nuclear deal and how Biden presidency may save the world from war. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Dr. Trita Parsi, the Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. QuincyINST.org is the website, or responsiblestatecraft.org. And you can tweet him at T-Parsi, P-A-R-S-I. Dr. Parsi, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. The Iran nuclear deal is, I thought this was like one of the major accomplishments of the Obama administration and the world. I mean, there were, 5 or 6 countries who were signatories to this. And we know, Donald Trump tried to blow it up. Where are we at with that? What are the odds that President-elect Biden will bring it back? And what are the potential obstacles to that Trump might have laid in the path of President Biden?
Yes, so Trump has done everything he can to try to destroy the deal, and he's failed, which tells you something about the political will of the other actors. They all see it, as does the previous administration and the majority of American people, as squarely in the U.S. national interest to continue it. But he's done everything he can. Trump has said that Biden has said that he wants to go back into it. All, with the exception of 2 Democratic candidates for president, said that they would go back to it. It is part of the Democratic platform to rejoin it, and all the major advisors to Biden have been on record for months now saying that they want to go back into it and that the policies of Trump have been a failure. So I think expectations are high that Biden absolutely has to try to go back to it, and I think actually the political price he will pay is not for trying to go back into it, as if he fails to try to go back into it. But
so
the
Trump
administration is trying to make that more difficult by imposing more sanctions and increasing their collaboration with Israel, Saudi Arabia, and UAE in the next 10 weeks to try to make it as difficult as possible for Trump to be able to rejoin this agreement.
Yeah, this is sort of the anti-Iran coalition, and we just started shipping massive amounts of hardware to the UAE. The UAE and Saudi Arabia, of course, combined to blockade Qatar back when Jared Kushner was looking to borrow $1 billion to get out of his real estate deal on 666 Fifth Avenue. Finally, the blockade ended right around the same time that Jared Kushner got his $1 billion from a fund that the second largest investor was the Qatar Sovereign Wealth Fund. I mean, there's weird stuff going on in the Middle East. Can you explain the dynamics of all this and how it might be playing out?
Well, it's really important that you raise this, because we have now, as a result of what they call the peace deal between Israel and UAE, we have 6-folded the arms sales to the UAE, gone from roughly $4 to $24 billion. It's the weirdest peace deal I've ever heard of, because usually when you have a peace deal, you have less arms sales, not more. This time around, we have 6-folded them to the UAE, and we're going to increase them to Israel as well. And if this continues, in which we continue to arm one side of the Middle East to the teeth, and then expect that the other side will not only not try to arm conventionally, but also continue to abide by an agreement that closes off any path they have to a nuclear weapon, then I think that is a really naive calculation. If we want this nuclear deal to work, then it needs to be embedded into a strategic context that makes sense for it to survive, that enables it to survive by making it attractive to both the United States and to the Iranians. And that's not going to be the case if we continue to arm to the teeth so many countries in the Middle East that have their own rivalries with Iran.
Is there an international consensus around that? I mean, the Iran deal was not a unilateral deal or a bilateral deal.
The only countries that are on record opposing it is actually Israel, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. The rest of the world welcome it strongly. It got passed in the UN Security Council 15-0. So the idea that it's a controversial deal, it's only been controversial in those 3 countries and in the U.S. Congress. And the rest of the world...
I mean, is there an international consensus that, maybe arming the UAE like this was not a good idea, that U.S. arms sales or any kind of arms sales to other countries in the region really need to now be incorporated into or considered as part of a renewed Iran nuclear deal? Or is this the sort of thing that we can just rejoin like the Paris Accords?
There is a consensus about rejoining. There's unfortunately not a consensus about armament in the Middle East, because almost all of these other countries, Europeans included, like to sell weapons to the Middle East, particularly the Persian Gulf countries that have a higher per capita expenditure on military equipment than any other region of the world. So as long as there is that opportunity to make money off of these oil-rich, gas-rich Arab authoritarian states that love to buy weapons, unfortunately, we're not going to see an international consensus being built against such arms sales. However, we should be quite clear that we cannot have a massive amount of arms sales and stability at the same time. We have to choose one of the two.
Are you sensing any signals, or has anybody thrown up any warning flags that Donald Trump, part of his Hail Mary approach as we close in on mid-December, when the states have to certify their electoral votes and all this sort of thing, and the election becomes legally real, that one of his strategies might be to create a crisis in the Middle East that would distract us, or even provide him with some basis for a state of emergency, or what, or just, you know, good old-fashioned vengeance, that he's, you know, or you know, dancing to the tune of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Israel, and create a confrontation with Iran that could be disastrous?
I think, unfortunately, the risk is there. I don't know if it would be because this is something Trump actually wants to do, but rather that at this stage, now when the elections essentially are over, that this would be something that is happening because he's not paying attention to anything than his own political survival. And as a result, those in his administration that have been pushing for a war with Iran or other forms of confrontation have an easier time pushing those things through because Trump is not paying attention, and so many other people in the Pentagon have been removed. And at a minimum, what that can lead to is that they're sending signals to other countries, to the Saudis, for instance, that if they were to initiate something, the U.S. would not object to it. That's what I think is the main risk in the next 2 months before inauguration, not necessarily that the U.S. itself were to do something.
A war by proxy. And are we talking about war, or are we just talking about conflict?
It's unclear. But what we do know is that Elliot Abrams, who's the Iran coordinator for Trump, left for Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE on Monday. And then next week, the Undersecretary for Military and Political Affairs from the State Department is going to go to those same 3 countries. And Pompeo himself is in Israel. So there is an unusual amount of activity with those 3 countries. And the topic of conversations, according to the U.S. State Department itself, has been Iran and nothing but Iran. So there's clearly a tremendous amount of activity going on. But what can be done, what will be done, what they're really planning to do, we can only speculate about.
Is there any sort of call to action for, we have about 45 seconds here before we hit a break. Is there any call to action to American citizens? Call your members of Congress and say, we really don't want a war with Iran, for example? Or is there any way to stop this train?
I think it would be very valuable if citizens were to make such calls, and also make calls and saying, expecting Congress to help create political space for a Biden administration to rejoin the nuclear deal, which is the best guarantee we have right now for making sure that there isn't war.